Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm pleased to speak to you in this conference and share with you some of my thoughts on how an effective and diverse board can be created for charities. Can I have the first slide? A charity is in essence a public institution that is established on the pillars of public trust and confidence, notwithstanding the fact that the organization is non-profit oriented, founded to promote non-pecuniary missions and causes such as the arts, education, a particular religion, or other forms of non-profit activities. Egregious and dishonest conduct by senior management of certain major charitable organizations in the past created widespread public disquiet and cynicism. It's the reason why many people are slow to entertain fundraising campaigns claiming to assist the poor or needy because they are wary of potential deceit of scams. Could I have the next slide? A public listed company, and I'm using the analogy of a public listed company because they also have public stakeholders like a charity, although they are invariably profit-oriented. A public listed company is, on the other hand, robustly regulated by rules on the stock exchange and subject to constant scrutiny and enforcement actions by the securities market regulator. In comparison, charities have more leeway and indulgence because most charities rely on volunteer or pro bono managers who are not remunerated or paid only an honorary. Next slide. I'm going to take you through some of the principles governing management of charities, and later my colleagues in the panel will also share with you some of their thoughts and some of the paramount principles. MCCY and the Singapore Charity Council publish and regularly updates the Code of Governance for Charities and IPC that principally has the following objectives. Make charities, number one, make charities more effective by sharing recommended practices on how charities should be properly governed and managed. Number two, it provides guidance to board members to help them carry out their duties as fiduciaries, i.e., people who are entrusted to act in the best interest of the charity. Number three, how do you boost public confidence in the charity sector by setting standards of good governance for charities to emulate? Next slide. While not regulated to the same extent like a listed company, management committees or trustees of a charity should adhere to the same guiding principles of integrity, transparency, and legality that govern listed companies and public institutions. Managers or trustees of a charity are reposed with fiduciary duties, not unlike the directors of company. Mismanagement of a major charity has the same deleterious effect on public confidence, not unlike the erosion of confidence in the financial market in the event of a major corporate failure. Next slide. Charity governance, it's a multifaceted subject. It deals with important issues such as accountability, fiduciary duties, essentially advocating the implementation of policies and mechanisms to ensure best practices, transparency, and complete and timely public disclosures. What does it mean? It means actually the charities, when they go about raising funds, when they publish reports or literature about themselves, it is good practice that they tell people, they tell the public what they do with and how the attaining some of the. I think it's very clear and how you use the monies that you raise from the public. So what are the key elements of good charity governance principles? It include transparency. Can I have the next slide? Transparency and board decisions and management actions, trust and integrity, openness, performance orientation, responsibility and accountability, mutual respect for the way the different stakeholders are involved in the management of the charity, and last but not least, commitment to the organization. An important part of effective governance is the paramount importance of risk management and internal controls. Because invariably, when you read in the papers or from the media how a charity has a debacle, what created all the problems are lapses in risk management and internal controls. So what is risk management? It's an institutionalized system for measuring, monitoring, and controlling the financial or operational risks of a charity. What does it involve? It involves putting in place a framework to identify the risks associated with the charity's operations and devising a set of documented procedures and processes to manage and contain the risks associated with the charity. Can I have the next one? And what are internal controls? It's a twin important mechanism to entrench and institutionalize in a charity. What are internal controls? It's a design process that is implemented to provide reasonable assurance in ensuring the effectiveness and efficiency of the operations of a charity, the reliability of financial reporting, and compliance with applicable laws and regulation. A charity must have a robust and effective system of internal controls, because if one man is allowed to do things without checks and balances, go on a frolic of his own, to override, countermand policies and procedures, it could spell trouble for the charity. And I think we have seen that previously. One notable example many years ago was NKF. The CEO was basically the charity, or his persona was very much part of the charity. And he was basically dictating as to how the charity was managed. Basically, internal controls, risk management were things that were there, but was it observed? Was it adhered in spirit, in form, or just merely in form and not in substance? So I think it's important that the risk management and internal controls in a charity must be robust and effective enough so that the organization is institutionalized and not run by one single person. Can I have the next slide? So who is responsible for what? I think it's important in a charity, there must be clarity of roles and functions of the board, i.e. the management committee, the board of trustees. And within this board, you must have certain committees set up to scrutinize and exercise oversight over certain important facets of the organization. And here, not unlike a public listed company, I think it's important you have committees like the audit committee, the nominating committee, and remuneration committee. Basically, the board is responsible for risk governance. It should ensure that management maintains a sound system of risk management and internal controls to safeguard the charity's interests and assets. The board and management are actually two different groups of people, not unlike a public listed company. And my panel members would share with you that when a charity is a startup, the board and management are basically the same group of people. But when the charity grows and develops and becomes a more complex organization, then you need to have a team of management to run the charity full-time, while the board is there to make sure that things are done and adhered in spirit and in substance. Can I have the next slide? The next slide, please. Sorry, I think there's a well, I'll take you through. Yes, this is the slide. Fundamentally, what is the role of the audit committee? It must review significant financial reporting issues and management's action to ensure the integrity of the financial statements of the charity. So you can't have a set of financials that basically do not reflect a true and fair view of how the organization's finances, the state of finances, how the monies are used, what happened to the reserves, who is paid how much, or effectively, what is the total expense? Are there provisions made for certain, accounting issues that need to be highlighted for the attention of not just the regulator, but the stakeholders as well. So the audit committee must review and report to the board on the adequacy and effectiveness of the charity's internal controls and internal audit functions. And I realized that perhaps for young startup charities, as I call it, or small charities, as they are classified, you may not have the wherewithal to set up so many committees and have so many people sitting on it, because fundamentally a charity is supported by volunteers, people who do pro bono. So, but we need to have some standards to aspire, so that eventually when the charity matures and becomes a better run and structured organization, then these are the standards that we need to adhere, because invariably when the charity gets bigger and there are more monies involved, that's where you need to have all these structures and mechanisms in place to monitor, to scrutinize, to check, and to ensure that things are done properly. Can I have the next slide on nominating committee? And what is the nominating committee's role and function? Basically, it leads the conduct of performance evaluation of the board as committees and directors. It must ensure that the charity adheres to board composition and diversity rules, assessing the independence of the directors or trustees, and taking a lead role in succession planning for key figures within the charity. Next slide. But before the next slide, sorry, can I have back the earlier slide, slide 15? Here is something which I like to pause and speak up. It is not unusual to find that after a while, especially the charity becomes a very successful, big charity, and the management team and the chief person who is running the charity, and if he's been there and a dominant person, there could be issues on the way the board is structured. Because someone who is the executive director, for example, who's running the charity, I think there are situations which I have observed in some charities that I have previously assessed as a judge of the Charity Governance Award, that the key person running the charity is a dominant person. So he gets to appoint on or ensures that the people who are aligned with him gets appointed to the board. And ironically, the board is supposed to be exercising oversight in the functions and roles that he plays. So I think all and sundry should be careful to look out at the way the board is structured. Does the executive director appoint the board, or that he has the de facto power to influence who gets to sit on the board, who decides on, who exercises oversight over him? And I think this is one of the signs which all and sundry should take note of, perhaps MCCY or Charity Council or some other governing authority should perhaps put in place in the code of governance, that there has to be perhaps a good practice where the nominating committee's views must predominate as to who sits on the board. And to have that kind of effective nominating committee, I would suggest that members of the nominating committee comprise of persons who are not on the board. So in a sense, you are truly independent. It's not a situation whereby because you sit on the board, you are appointed because the executive director has the power to influence you to be on the board or not on the board. Therefore, you become a mere rubber stamp in seconding the nomination or the recommendation of the executive director. So the nominating committee, in essence, should comprise of persons who are entirely not members of the board, have no connection with the charity, and then there just specifically, perhaps on a 2-year term, to decide on who should sit on the board. I think this is a function that perhaps in the next version of the Code of Governance for Charities, a provision should be made in the new rules. Can I have the next slide? Remuneration Committee. Of course, what does it do? It develops policies on executive remuneration. It recommends the remuneration packages for key management. Remuneration Committee, likewise, should comprise of people who are not on the board, or at least truly independent. There should be a provision in the Code of Governance that says that basically the people who decide on the key executives package and remuneration are not in any way beholden or felt indebted, or it's a whole schoolboy network of sorts with the key persons who are running the charity full-time. So that way you don't have a situation whereby all the committees are mere rubber stamps of 1 or 2 persons. Yeah. Can I have the next slide, which I will talk a bit on the diversity of the board of a charity. Diligent, it's a professional service advisory firm, established a set of principles for board diversity of companies, which I would like to adapt for or could be adapted for charities. A board diversity policy doesn't have to be an overly lengthy document. It needs to indicate the board's intention for enhancing the diversity of its board members. Next slide. Boards should consider some of the factors in the diversity policy of the charity. The NC or the nominating committee should take the charity's board diversity policy into consideration when making recommendations. Members of the board should be considered according to their merits in addition to the benefits of diversity they might bring. Board director nominees should have knowledge of the charity's objectives and operation. I take this opportunity to highlight that some charities are set up as companies limited by guarantee. So in a sense, you call that the company's board is also not incorrect, because in essence, it's a company limited by guarantee. And the other version is society. Next slide. Nominating committee should factor traits such as the financial expertise, knowledge of sustainability, business expertise, or other similar competencies. A board member should have the appropriate skills and abilities. He should have a good set of moral values. He is someone of integrity. He did not have any run-in with any authorities. He's not subject to any investigation concerning moral issues like dishonesty. It's also important in the diversity consideration of a board that the board should strive to achieve a reasonable and balanced gender distribution. Now, I do not believe that board diversity means you need to have X number of females vis-a-vis X number of male members of the board or trustees. I think it's important that while you strike a balance so that no capable, competent female board candidate is excluded because it's a male-dominated club. I think that's wrong. All right, but diversity is more than gender. It's a lot more about the ability of the candidate to contribute because of his expertise, because of his experience, because of his knowledge in certain aspects which the charity is focused on. For example, if someone is very good in the area of education, because he used to be an ex-principal of an established school, he should be brought in for a charity that basically is set up to promote education. So whether he is a male or female, I think that should not be the consideration. Neither should you say that I'm just going to include A, B, C because they belong to a gender which we want to showcase that we are, we have X number of females on board. I think this is something which I'd like to highlight. Next slide. It's important that the nominating committee should consider the charity stage of development in making recommendations. I think here, again, I would like to reiterate that charities, they take time to mature. They take time to develop. So a small charity, you don't have the resources, neither would you be able to attract that many number of volunteers to serve on your board. So you should take all these into consideration that if you're a small charity or a startup, how do you manage this diversity aspect, which is an important consideration for all charities? I think that should be highlighted. And then the number and composition of board directors should reflect the current and future needs of the charity. Because most charities should be set up on the principle that they are there for a long time and not a one-off or 1-2 years and then they disappear. So, you need to do a lot of forecasting and planning. It may have just started, but, as you grow bigger and you become more successful in attracting people to help, to support, to donate, then, of course, your number and composition of board and directors should be commensurate with the needs of the charity at a certain point in time. And most importantly, board self-evaluations within the committee or the board of trustees. I think the nominating committee should take all this into consideration, because if on a no-names basis, fellow board members felt that this person has not been contributing, he hardly turns up, he doesn't contribute, I think that should be taken into consideration, irrespective of the person's, his stature or his status. More importantly is that you want people who really can contribute and who have a heart to support and to, do his part or her part for the charity. Next slide. And of course, a charity, like all organizations, you need to have strategic planning. You need to see if are you working closely with other charities, and how do you connect so that you become a more substantive critical mass to promote, for example, education or arts or a particular cause that's noble, for example, environmental, climate and all these issues. I think you should take into consideration strategic planning in a long-term kind of time frame. Succession planning is important because, like all organizations and institutions, you can't have the first group of founding members holding forth, and after a while, because of age, because of natural causes that people dropped out, and then it comes to a standstill. So I think it's important, particularly if the charity is very successful, and the key executive director who is running it, has been there for X number of years. I think the board should also make sure that there is proper succession planning after a number of years. There should be new blood brought in. People who are not performing, you should look at more capable replacement, because you can't have a charity that basically is there for the lifespan of that particular person running the organization. So succession planning is important, and board members should be careful to ensure that a situation doesn't arise where the key person decides on who sits on the board, who then decides on his tenure or his continuity of tenure. That's not healthy for a charity. So succession planning is important. So nominating committees should be intimately involved in creating the final draft of the board diversity policy, because of course the board decides on, look, this is our diversity policy, but the nominating committee should be very intimately involved, and that the NC should know the board diversity policy well, so that they are better able to identify the best candidates to sit on the board. Next slide. Last and not least, as I've said earlier, charities are set up to ensure that they exist for a long time, not a short-term 3-year or 5-year and they disappear. So it's important that the constitutional founding principles of the charity must be clearly entrenched in its constitutional documents. The ethos, the spirit, the tenets of faith should be clearly set out and enunciated. Of course, along the way, there will be change, but more importantly, the board and other stakeholders to ensure that the charity is able to adapt and continue. There's continuity despite changes that come because of time, because of the evolution of the entire ecosystem. And in a situation where a particular charity fails in its purposes and objectives, that's where the doctrine of cypre will come in. And what does it mean? It means the charity is no longer able to achieve its objectives or its goals and aspirations as it was first founded. In such a situation, the Constitution should provide that the trustees should apply to court to either dissolve the charity or to restructure the charity so that the organization can function on a set of new noble purposes and objectives. This is something that's important because we are talking about the effectiveness of the charity. It must last for as long as possible. And if one day things change, objectives cannot be fulfilled because of different situations, because of global situations, then there must be a provision for the trustees or the members, if it's a company limited by guarantee, the members of the company should have a provision in the Constitution that they should apply to court and get directions as to how the charity, whether it should be dissolved or it should continue in another version. I've come to the end of my presentation. The concluding remarks is that these are mere guidelines. There's no one size fit all. At the end of the day, a charity should be driven by principles and not rules-based, because rules can be circumvented, but the spirit of the principles must be adhered so that you can ensure that the charity exists for some time, a long time, and that at the end of the day, the public benefits from the existence of the charity, and that public monies raised are well spent, properly accounted for, and that it's integrity and transparency in which the organization is operated. I've come to the end of my presentation. I'll be happy to take questions at the panel discussions. Thank you.